Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I'm your host, Badbaby, accompanied by my co-host, Robert Pepino. And tonight we have with us Walter Bosley, and we are going to pick his brain thoroughly.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. I'm your co-host with your regular host, Badbaby. And tonight we have an incredible guest. He's been on with us before, of course. His name is Walter Bosley. He's an author of many books, but Walter Bosley is a world traveling author and explorer of extraordinary phenomenon, gang. And we're going to be talking about some of this tonight. He has served as a counterintelligence specialist during the final years of the Cold War for the FBI and served as a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations running COINTELPRO operations. For the past 7 years, Walter has been a personal security and anti-terrorism consultant for corporate and private clients around the world. In addition, he has founded the Lost Continent Library Publishing Company, a small press that specializes in classic adventures, fiction, and including his own works under the pseudonym A.E. Guest. That's interesting, A.E. Guest. Walter, I'm going to have to ask you about that. But his website is lostcontinentlibrary.com, and I will post that in the chat for anybody who wants to go to the website and check it out. Walter, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure having you back.
Well, hey, it's good to be back here. Let me say that pseudonym E.A. Guest is actually one that I don't use anymore. I had kind of sensitive employment a few years back, and that's why I even started using that. But I don't use it anymore. Everything's under my name. And I also have the website empireofthewheel.blogspot.com. And that one probably has more stuff that your listeners would be interested in.
Wonderful. Does the AE stand for anything particular, Walter?
EA Guest?
EA, yes. Excuse me.
No, it's just a name that was in the family, and I just used it as a pseudonym.
Okay.
It happens to be. It also happens to be the name of an American, British American. I think he was a little both poet back in the early 20th century, but. I just grabbed it out of the family past because I needed to use a name. That's all.
Gotcha. So you're an author of many books, obviously, and I hope your publishing company is doing well because it seems like a lot of self-starters, small publishing companies are really starting to make their mark, and that's a really good thing because it's always the large corporations who seem to kind of envelop everything and. Basically, they dictate to everybody, but, when you're self-published or have a small publishing company, you're your own boss, and that's a wonderful thing. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, it is still what you would call a micro press. I not only publish, historically, my company, I published 5, briefly 6 other authors. Since going to nonfiction, because originally it was founded as an adventure, kind of a pulp, classic adventure fiction publishing company, and that's actually what I wrote first. And the other authors that I published wrote fiction. Of course, as things change and interests come and go from the public, you kind of have to roll with that. And I actually used to publish the old-fashioned way. I would, money out of pocket, I would do print runs, 500, 1,000 copies.
Walter, is Empire of the Wheel fiction or nonfiction?
It's nonfiction.
Nonfiction.
But,
okay, I have a question about that book. You talk about things that you discovered in Disneyland and about the 3 plates. Can you explain that? Because you're talking about Tesla, right?
3 plates. You mean the intersection of the telluric currents?
Yes, the currents. That's what I'm talking about, the currents. Do you think it's tied to Disney?
Well, what do you tied to Disney? Well, I wrote the book Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom, which is all about that, and I alluded to it in Empire of the Wheel. It is tied to Disney in that this intersection is, according to my research, in Disneyland, but it was actually identified, in my opinion, again, as a result of my research. It was really the work of a man named C.V. Wood, who was the engineer hired from SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, by the Disney brothers to engineer physical Disneyland in the 50s. So
let me ask you, this energy field that comes out of these lines, do you feel that ties into some sort of mind control, or explain to us what it does?
The energy exists. It's like electricity. Electricity is amazing. It does positive things. It can also be deadly. It depends on how you handle it and how you apply it, of course. The telluric current simply exists. It's an ELF, extreme low frequency energy, that runs through the planet. This is scientific fact. And what I hypothesize, what I propose in Latitude 33 and elsewhere, is that C.V. Wood was aware of this energy, and he constructed physical Disneyland in a way, in conjunction with the carousel being placed atop the intersection, to draw the energy up from the intersection of these three telluric energy current lines and disperse it through the park. Now, it's not mind control in the popular sense. It was really, in my opinion, and from anything you could call evidence, something that was intended to be merely a positive influencer or influence. It was, in my opinion, done to enhance the experience of being at the park. But
so
as
it's
far
mood altering.
Not in an extreme sense, no. You got to remember, and I say this in the book, I've said it elsewhere, I've said it before, I'll say it again. What C.V. Wood did does not appear to have been a negative, dark, evil thing. A lot of people want to latch on to, what I propose and spin that to be there's that evil Walt Disney and his minions doing this MK Ultra mind control stuff, and that's not the case at all from the research I've done.
This is a natural energy field, then.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. I mean, I have, like you said, I have heard that Disney is tied into that part of the realm, and I just wondered if this was part of it. That was just my question.
Well, it sounds like, Walter, that what you're explaining to me is more or less what was created. Disney itself, the park itself, more or less acts like a giant capacitor. And capacitors, all they do is discharge energy, and that's free energy, free flowing. You can go back and read Tesla's papers and information, but a lot of people have based their technology off of Tesla. There's a guy out of Canada who's based all his technology off of Tesla's work, and he basically says the same thing. I mean, you could put a giant copper antenna, a fairly large one, in your backyard. It'll collect the free-flowing electrons and disperse them, of course, through electrical copper wires that you run into your house, and it disperses it like a giant capacitor. So free energy flows everywhere. That kind of sounds like what you're basically saying to me. Am I right or wrong? Basically, more specifically, I tend to be a proponent of the theory, or subscribe to the theory that, there is the so-called world grid, and, the planet, this energy is generated by the planet itself. It's part of the planet's function. Yeah, essentially, but remember, it's an ELF, it's an extreme low frequency. Right,
and
I got that, yeah.
Unless we tap into it in the way that Tesla theorized and experimented with, which, I don't think we are. We're not. It's not. It's not something that can just be that can power, fantastic machinery and devices the way Tesla envisioned them, without this application of the full spectrum of his technological vision. Without these big Warden Cliff towers, without without the structure, the infrastructure that would draw this energy up and magnify it, it's not that strong.
Right. I agree with you. So, I agree with you to a certain extent. I got to tell you, I've done a lot of experiments. I definitely experimented with water and hydrogen. Very simple process to extract hydrogen. It's just a simple electrolytic process most people just aren't aware of because, people have been blinded to the narrative of everything. So people don't ever put their best foot forward. They just take the narrative that's given to them and, continue to walk with their eyes closed. But, it's unfortunate, but, I tell you, Walter, if I had the money to continue my experimentation, I'd be driving around in my car right now with water, I was memorized by Stan Mayer and his water car, and I tried to follow his specs as much as I could, but he never put his blueprints online, so we could never really find them. And of course, he was murdered as well, unfortunately. But this always seems to be the norm when it comes to free energy. The so-called masters have to keep us in check. But regardless of that, we're moving forward. So your new book is The Empire of the Wheel. Let's talk about that. What inspired you to write this, Walter?
Well, it's not exactly new. It's Empire of the Wheel. Yeah, it came out in 2011, and there's been 3. Empire of the Wheel 1, 2, and 3. The third one, I think, was 2014, maybe 15 when that came out, I think. What really kicked off the whole Empire of the Wheel thing was some follow-up that I was doing to Latitude 33, the book about Disneyland. I was very specifically following where the lines that intersect, this hypothetical situation that I proposed, these lines that intersect in Disneyland.
So, before you go any further, Walter, you talking about ley lines or
they're popularly
to a certain extent?
They are popularly referred to as ley lines. Technically, they are telluric current because a ley line is a specific thing. And I like to make that difference out there, that difference because, a ley line is a specific thing. But popularly, they're referred to as ley lines. And I used to refer to them as that. But to be more technically correct, it's the let's call it the world grid line.
Okay.
So we had these 3 world grid energy lines that intersected Disneyland, and I wanted to see where, when you followed those lines out of the park, where they might lead, and if there were any reports of any manifestation of, extraordinary phenomena associated with where these lines went. And what's interesting is 2 of the lines come out this direction. I'm in what's called the Inland Empire, out here about an hour or so east of Los Angeles in the San Bernardino Valley. And 2 of the lines come out in this direction and connect to more of this world grid. And I was specifically looking, since I live here, for any kind of stories of strange phenomena or ghosts or anything like that. And sure enough, I found, an alleged haunting, a ghost story about a shopping mall that was built here in 1967. And I learned about this from a librarian who had posted something on a website. And she told me about this woman, Cora Stanton, who in 1915 had allegedly committed suicide. And there was all this mystery and intrigue surrounding this woman's death. And when I sat down with the librarian, a lady named Ann Walker, she told me this, amazing story of this woman in clothing from around the early 20th century, who was being seen by, in one instance, a child who was in the store, in one of the mall stores with her father, and how in this same store, employees would be afraid to go into the back room because they'd feel a presence. After closing up the night before, people would come back in the next morning, and items would be moved around in a way that they clearly had not fallen. They had to be placed carefully. And so essentially this department store was haunted, according to these tales. But the librarian, Anne, she told me, go look at the old newspapers, and you'll see that there's something more to this story. And I did. And boy, oh boy, I not only found the mystery of Cora Stanton, but I found that there were 6 other very questionable deaths that occurred, one as early as a few months prior in the summer, but most of them within days or just a week, a couple of weeks of this Cora Stanton. And basically the bottom line was, being an experienced professional criminal investigator, my gut told me, hey, there's something very questionable about these deaths. I think they might have had a serial murderer in the area.
Well, let me ask you something, Walter. Mm-hmm. With these deaths occurring around this paranormal activity of this person that died, now those people who were subject to these strange paranormal deaths, are they also part of the haunting itself in this mall itself?
Well, no. What's interesting is the mall, I subsequently learned, had been built on the site of what used to be a large city park here in San Bernardino. This was a huge park, very popular. It was technically the Disneyland of its day. The history of San Bernardino is not what it is now. And this woman was the only one of these 7 people who died under very questionable circumstances. This woman was the only one of the 7 who died in the park. And where she died, where her body was found, is now the parking lot of this very department store that's on the south end of the mall. It used to be the lake. She was found floating in the lake. Now, she allegedly swallowed some poison and then drowned herself. There were 2 small children, a brother and sister, 4 years old and 2 years old, who were given poisoned candy. And there was a 14-year-old girl. Now, they died across the valley, those 2 small children. There was a 14-year-old girl in Redlands, about 6 or 7 miles away. She had been given a poison orange. There was a man who allegedly shot himself just a few blocks from the 14-year-old girl in Redlands, and the other 2 victims died, one up in the San Bernardino Mountains and one here in the foothills north of town. So the victims, they were spread out over the valley. And the ghost story that I have found associated, with any of this is the one of the woman at the mall.
That's interesting. I'm just wondering, I was thinking as you were speaking, I wonder if that land, besides being, this grid system that you were mentioning earlier, or the ley lines that run across the planet, I just wonder if you did any research into finding out that maybe had been some old type of ancient Indian burial of some kind.
No, it was no. The Indian burial grounds here are kept classified, as a matter of fact. Very few employees of the National Park Service and local law enforcement are actually briefed in on where those burial grounds are. It's a very closely guarded secret. Now, where the mall is built, where the park used to be, that used to be an area called Urbita Springs, and there were natural hot springs, well springs and such there. Right. And it happened to be where some of the local native cultures lived, but it was not any kind of burial ground They weren't swindled out of anything. It was just an area that, was purchased legally and developed into this big park. But the springs were part of it, and that is an interesting element to it when you consider, some of the potential, holistic spiritual energy type of stuff that goes on in natural healing.
Right.
So the location certainly, not only just having an intersection of, because it has some telluric world grid energy lines that intersect in the park. Not only did that park, that Oviedo Springs area, have an intersection of its own of this energy, naturally that energy would flow through, where these springs were, and it made it a natural choice for, a healing center. So to speak.
Right. Now, let me ask you something, Walter. I mean, you use the word telluric. What does that actually mean? A breakdown of that word.
I'm, off the top of my head, I honestly don't know the etymological breakdown of the word telluric. All I do know is the history of that the railroad industry, specifically the telegraphy, Western Union.
I got you.
That they and their engineers could identify this, and they learned how to apply this, draw this telluric current up from, the
It sounds like, Walter, sounds like they appropriated a word for something that didn't exist at the time. That's how it's sounding to me. So maybe they would invent a word for it.
Well, what do you mean they invented a?
In other words,
they might have. They might have.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Because sometimes there's something that comes up that there is actual no word for, so they had to initiate a word. They had to, in other words,
that's
they had
possible, but
right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I don't think we should get wrapped around the axle and the etymological roots of the word itself for this particular topic. But it's an interesting question, and I've never been asked that before, so I'll take a look at that.
I give kudos to me, first one to ask.
Yeah, there you go. I do know that those who understand and study geomorphology, how the terrains of, in our times we'll call it planets, are formed in the early days of, with the lava flows and all that. When a planet is formed, those who study this geomorphology are the ones who can more easily identify where the telluric currents flow, but they can be measured also. And I'll be honest with you, it might be in my book, the answer to your question, but it's been so long since I've looked at that specific thing, because I've been focused on the other parts of it, that the answer, I'm sure the answer's out there, and I would say that it probably does have some meaning within its, if you analyze the roots of it linguistically.
Absolutely, and like you said, I'm not going to harp on that. I just wanted to kind of find out for myself, kind of if it was invented at the time for those specific reasons.
It's probably, if you
that
Google
area
it, you probably find that answer.
Yeah. But anyway, I find it interesting that what you're mentioning, this is pretty much a worldwide thing. Ley lines, the underwater aquifers that run under the pyramids and under many different mega structures worldwide always seems to have some sort of paranormal or magnetic or electrical field involved with it. Is this the same case that we're talking about here?
Probably.
Yeah, I would have to say so. Yeah. So okay. So Walter, moving forward here, we're talking about the paranormal. We're talking about paranormal activity happening in certain places. But here's the thing. I mean, it seems like with paranormal activity, I've seen so much of this stuff taking place. it always seems to wrap around very old buildings, like you said, old malls. Well, obviously this place has been knocked down. It's a parking lot now, and I'm sure strange events still take place. You know, during the Civil War, in the fields of Gettysburg, there has been numerous reports, and they still go on to this day, of apparitions forming in the fields. They can see old soldiers still fighting battles, balls of light emanating and appearing out of nowhere, floating across the fields. People go in there and they get nauseous or have feelings of nausea or euphoric feelings or feeling of fear, all kinds of stuff. Is this all pertaining to this grid that we're talking about? Is it because of this electromagnetic grid that these paranormal activities take place, or is it just a random? Is it random paranormal activity? I'm sure you're aware of the Skinwalker Ranch and everything that's taken place there, and all the paranormal activity, vortexes and vortexual holes opening up, and all kinds of creatures coming out of there from all the information I've read and listened to. Are we talking about the same thing, or are you coming at this from a different point of view? I know it's a mouthful, but you know, from your perspective, how are you seeing this?
From my position is that, going back to what you said about the ghosts, like people see on the Gettysburg battlefield and such.
Right.
I'm inclined to think that what we're actually seeing is a time dimension phenomenon. Okay. That, and this is a whole long discussion on its own, but essentially time has an aspect of everything's happening at once, or there are multiple, layers to time, but we as individuals, through the course of a material mortal life, our experience of time is lived in a linear fashion, okay? So that these other aspects of time would seem very strange and extraordinary to us. So in other words, what these people are seeing are the actual battle, moments of the Battle of Gettysburg going on in some other layer of time. Not so much a ghost, not so much a paranormal entity, but they're essentially glimpsing through time.
An echo, right, Walter? It's like an echo of what we're seeing, maybe?
It could be an echo, or it could be, kind of however events, actions get recorded in the layers of time. They might actually be seeing the actual thing going on. This is just a hypothesis. But I'm of the mind that it's less spooky paranormal and more time dimensional paranormal or extraordinary phenomenon.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you what you're saying, because I think the only reason, we put a time stamp in this human form that we exist in. We go from point A to point B, right? Where everything else exists outside of time. So when people say, I saw, these Roman soldiers on their horses with their battle shields and spears and walking through my yard, they're seeing something, an echo. I don't know how to really explain it, but like an echo, something from the past that a momentary lapse in time opens up, and you can actually view that event, because everything exists simultaneously, in my opinion.
The veil between the layers, those particular layers, has thinned or parted for whatever reason, is how I look at it.
Is that what they're messing with CERN? Is, because it spins really fast, right? And they talk about they're trying to tear the veil.
CERN has been a topic of much late night private conversation between myself and my associate and friend Joseph Farrell and a couple other folks.
Great friend to have, by the way.
Yeah, and we're of the mind that, without revealing too much of what we're not prepared to be public with yet, we're of the mind that it's very possible, none of us here can be sure, but it's very possible that whatever's going on at CERN is messing with material reality, messing with time, space, continuum stuff. Yeah, we're very open to that and have had some really interesting discussions, along those lines. So CERN is something definitely I would, keep an eye on relative to reports like, people think they're seeing ghosts from the past or when things disappear. I mean, our conversation on this, really dove into this when that airplane a few years ago disappeared over the Indian Ocean.
Yes,
which is not been found.
Flight.
Yeah, the Malaysian flight.
Yeah.
So, I always thought it was kind of like maybe they were in the Bermuda Triangle and went into another dimension, but then they found debris.
Yeah, in many cases they do find. Well, now the debris, though, if you're talking about the Malaysian flight, from my last understanding, is the debris. There's still something questionable about it. But
that's what I said. They said they. I'm starting to think maybe they put that out there. So people would think that they crashed or whatever.
But if it turns out to be the debris from that actual plane, there's still enough monkey business associated with that flight that even if it's not a fantastic solution to the mystery, it might still be an eyebrow raiser, a shocking, answer to the mystery.
Well, there's also the thought process.
Let's get back to your book for a minute, Walter. This girl who is haunting the mall store, you were investigating. Now, you do investigations for a living also, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious. Was she murdered or did she commit suicide? Did you ever find that out?
Well, that's what my book's all about. It's I propose that she was murdered, and she was murdered in, more specifically, my theory is that she was murdered as part of and actually the central part of an occult ritual that had to do with this world grid energy, this tapping into the telluric current. Have you? There's a chemical. I'm doing a brain dump on how to pronounce it, but it's been in the news lately when they're talking about these horrific Pizzagate theory killings and the stuff involved with all that. It's an ephedrone or something. Anyway, it's the chemical that is released when a human being is, under some type of the shock. Yeah,
it comes off the adrenal glands. It's called adrenal something.
Yeah, it would be that they were trying to. This is the theory in the book, which my co-author Rick Spence, he and I both presented this. He's my co-author on the first book, and what we present in this is that the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators, whoever they were, of these murders, were attempting to do
I'm sorry. I don't. Are you there?
Still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
They were attempting, the perpetrators in our theory, were attempting to use sympathetic magic, by killing the victims in physical proximity to this telluric current, because theoretically they believed that this chemical that is produced in a state of horror and terror, combined with the energy, the telluric energy, would give them a power that they could wield and sort of feed the grid with this energy of fear, this energy of horror of their victims. And this is a main part of the theory of this occult ritualistic murder that we're talking about in these books.
Well, that almost sounds like going back to Aleister Crowley's, induction of magic and using fear to instill their power over somebody else. And it almost sounds like the usage of psychic or kinetic psychic energy to cause all kinds of physical harm to another human being. I'm sure you know all about remote viewing, and I'm sure you saw the movie, the spoof they made, The Men Who Stare at Goats. Well, in actuality, some of that's true. I mean, the whole heart stopping of the goat, that was actually true. That was part of it. But the kinetopsychic ability of that individual must have had a very strong psychic ability in order to stop the heart of that goat. But needless to say of that, the so-called black magic, I mean, that has been around for literally centuries and centuries, and maybe that there's this group, this cabal of individuals who've learned to key in on that dark energy and are using it to benefit themselves, keep everybody else in fear, and keep the control construct in their hands. I don't know. That's just a thought, but I'm not sure what you think about that.
We propose that the perpetrator or perpetrators of this alleged, occult ritual murder of these 7 victims was something that the perpetrators believed. Whether we believe it or not, or whether it actually can be done, we think that, and I think this, that these perpetrators certainly believed that they could do this and that they were doing this. As to who they were, I'm convinced that it was a particular group of perpetrators that were involved or members of the spiritualist temple that was here in San Bernardino at that time in 1915. And this whole mystery that I've investigated with this Empire of the Wheel subject has a direct connection to Harry Houdini and his investigations of corrupt spiritualists in the decade after, in the 1920s. It's very interesting. You mentioned Aleister Crowley. Well, among the interesting people that were present in this mystery in San Bernardino in 1915, Aleister Crowley was one of them. I was able to demonstrate that Crowley had to pass through San Bernardino in the heart of while this mystery was going on, just days before the mystery woman Cora Stanton was found dead in the lake. Now, here's the irony. I have researched this, investigated as thoroughly as possible, and it is my position that Aleister Crowley had nothing to do with these murders, these alleged murders. Had nothing to do with whatever magical, occult, ritualistic activity that was going on. In fact, it is my very strong opinion that he would have been vehemently opposed to this. I do suspect that he might have been aware of it, that something, bad or dark was going on in San Bernardino at that time, but I do not think he would have had any hand in it and would not have approved of it. Now, the other figure who was here and is in the periphery and involved in this mystery was the local Episcopal minister, and that man's name was the Reverend Walter Franklin Prince, and he was here in 1915 when all this was going on. Now, those of you who know your history will recognize the name Walter Franklin Prince because
I think
Prince,
they made a movie after him, didn't they?
No, not that I'm aware of.
It was back in the 80s?
No. Walter Franklin Prince he became the head of the American Psychical Research Society, okay? And he and Harry Houdini led the investigation of the corrupt spiritualists in the following decade, the 1920s. The investigation, which some have proposed, and I agree with, got Harry Houdini murdered by spiritualists, agents of the spiritualists. So you see the connection here. We had the spiritualists, a very popular lodge or temple of spiritualism here in San Bernardino. Okay, in fact, it was the first spiritualist temple in the state of California, the one that was here in San Bernardino at the time. And so, as I propose, if these spiritualist folks were involved in these 7 murders and this occult ritual stuff, Walter Franklin Prince was here, okay? And the book goes into the great detail as to, what his role was in all this mystery. It is my suspicion that his experience here in San Bernardino with these mysterious deaths is what led to him investigating and going after corrupt spiritualists in the 1920s with Harry Houdini. By the way, Harry Houdini was performing in Los Angeles, was in Southern California also when this mystery was unfolding in 1915. So it's very probable that Prince and Houdini came together because of what happened here in San Bernardino in 1915. This Empire of the Wheel mystery, as books 2 and 3 demonstrate and lay out, this Empire of the Wheel mystery here in San Bernardino in 1915, it has its connections to much bigger, things. It was a much bigger event that has remained under the rug for a century.
Walter, I'm just thinking that as you were saying this, I wonder if that has a connection to the Church of Satan in San Francisco, and there was a big hoopla about that for quite a while. And
you mean the spiritualist temple, or
in San Francisco, the Church of Satan, the Black Church.
I doubt a direct. I'm not aware of any direct connection between the spiritualist temple at the time, or even after, to the Church of Satan. But as you know, if you're well versed in these, occult social circles, one thing leads to another, and there you could probably find, a thread connecting some of the players eventually to that, but nothing directly that I'm aware of.
Well, another curious thing with all the information that's been coming out that has been leaked out now for the last several years, about the child sacrifices and the ritualistic events that take place, with these elites, and then you have this woman, Marina Abramovic, with just the bizarre, this totally bizarre and sick, in my opinion, art, if you can even call that art, using blood, urine, and semen, and writing just some bizarre obscenities on walls and calling that art, and creating these cakes where these so-called Hollywood elites and others, I'm sure, have attended, creating these human life-size cakes and cutting into them and eating them. There has to be a connection somewhere along the lines to what you're talking about.
There may be in a thematic way, yes, but you never know. There could be some type of direct lineage. Now, in Empire of the Wheel 3, I follow where the threads lead from 1915 up to the present, and there's some interesting stuff in there that is it kind of, to use your word earlier, it echoes or shows kind of a reflection of some of the things that have gone on in recent times, like Pizzagate, for instance, or any situation you have where you have adults committing horrific crimes against children. One of the threads I pulled from this 1915 mystery led to Riverside in the early 20th century, and in turn connected to the Wineville chicken coop murders, which Clint Eastwood made his film Changeling about the mother of one of the victims. Angelina Jolie played her. The mother of one of the victims, I believe the victim that got Gordon Northcutt caught and, of course, convicted and executed. And when he was first arrested, this was in the 1920s, when he was first arrested, he told one of the district attorneys that he had actually been abducting the boys for very wealthy, powerful men in Riverside, California. And when they were done with doing what they wanted to do with the boys, they were given to him to dispose of. Now, he told the district attorney and I believe the arresting officer this, and then when they went to follow up, he kind of nervously made a joke about it and said, no, I did it. It was all me. And, of course, he went to his grave, never revealing who these wealthy, powerful men in Riverside may have been.
Well, same thing with Boys Town, all those boys being abused. The information came out. Of course, no high-level official ever went to jail. The same old story where these boys from the Boys Town community were being abused, flown into Washington, abused sexually. Just horrific acts from the information I've learned. And, this was during the Reagan administration, but, I don't know if Ronald Reagan was directly involved. Never heard of that, but a lot of people within those circles, a lot of people within those circles, were doing what you said, whatever they wanted with these boys, and then being disposed of, not necessarily killed, but just gotten rid of. And of course, who's going to believe some orphan from a community like that? And it's always the same. So it's sad. It's heartbreaking, actually.
I think
it seems to continue on.
I think we'll find a little bit more answer to the Franklin scandal and other such things as people involved in it die off. That's how these things work. Just like when the last person who would suffer any consequences for the JFK assassination, once that person is gone, then miraculously somebody will find the document which is the answer to the JFK assassination, right? Because as long as parties who will face consequences for it are alive, and they're powerful enough, it'll stay hidden until they're gone.
Right. Well, I guess Bill Cosby wasn't on a high enough level because he was convicted on 57 accounts.
Something like that.
I think it was yesterday or today.
Yeah.
So I guess you have to be in a certain position of power, not necessarily just wealth, but actual power. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean you can be rich, and rich will buy you a certain amount of coverage to a degree, but it's that power, depending upon how you leverage or lobby your wealth, determines what your actual power is. And there are people who lack the wealth of many others who actually are very rich in power, of course. And so it all comes down to the power and the connections and what you're willing to do for the people who are watching your back and covering for you. To what degree you're willing to sell your soul, right?
Well, you just said it. Are you selling your soul, or are you just I don't know. I need that word, selling your soul. It's we use it as such an analytic overview of just semantics. Most of these people, they their souls are so dark and black they couldn't give a damn if they sold them or not. It was probably sold from the minute they were born. But it's just an idealism that, or not an idealism, that's the wrong word to use, but it's like innate in them, and they have these tendencies within them, and and they'll abuse anyone however they can in order to reach a certain amount of power, a certain amount of status, of power, however they can use it in order to achieve whatever they want. And again, this is all me, though. This is from my point of view, how I view things, that, the darkest souls on the planet are usually the ones who climb to the highest power position, because most of us, at least for me, Walter, I mean, I'm a guy who just is a simple person who wants to live my life, and enjoys learning, understanding things and how things function and why things function. But it always seems to work backwards. The worse of a human being you are, the higher power you have or position in life you have. The best people on the planet usually, are very humble, with humble means, and you really don't know most of them. You probably never will. And they're probably moving on to the next level of existence, That's just my opinion.
It's been my view that if that were the case, if only the baddies are the ones who have power and knowledge, this world we live in would be a much more hideous experience than it is now. You and I would not be having this conversation openly like this. It's my opinion that actually some very darn good people attain great wealth and positions of power because they provide a balance, a check to the bad ones. And they keep them. The what?
The yin and the yang.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point I was trying to make is the only thing I needed to add, which I didn't finish to add to that, Walter, is that there's much more of us than there are of them, and that's the check and balance that we usually are able to have this conversation.
In a practical sense, though, just the goodwill of decent people is not enough to keep these people in check if they are really the ones who have all the power and real wealth and stuff. That's why, I think it's much more practical to see and recognize that there are some really good people in those positions of power and wealth, because they have to be able to check them on their own level, which no matter how much, no amount of great intentions you and I have as aw shucks humble guys, okay, is going to really control if bad people have all the power and the real wealth, or if you have to go bad to attain that level. In the practical sense, they're just going to kick us around, okay? But what really, in the practical sense, there has to be people on their own level of power and wealth who can kind of stand there and say, hey, we have a different philosophy. We're going to keep you in check. Because these bad, the bad people, so to speak, they take advantage to the fullest extent that they can, see. And if they had nobody in opposition to them on their own level, consciously, like I said, this world we live in would be much different and much more hideous and a terrible place.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with you to a certain extent, but when you have, for all intents and purposes, a secret government who's created, incredible exotic technology that's been hidden from us for the better part of 70 years, the secret space program, the healing technologies, which are all out there and exist, and none of it has been released to the public. They really do have control to a certain degree. But on the other hand, there's us who say, we supersede them in the fact that we really don't, I mean, at least I don't, Walter. I don't give them energy. I don't give them any credence or value. The value that their dark value that they try to create is through fear. How do they do that? Through media, right, or through fear of government. For the most part, as far as I'm concerned, none of that affects me in any way. Unless somebody comes up to my house with a gun saying you're going to do this, it really doesn't affect me. But the problem is that a lot of good people buy into that illusion of fear that they create. if they would let that go, that would all
Mm-hmm.
collapse in a New York second. So just another.
Well, we have to keep in mind, though, that the extent to which we say that we propose that there are healing technologies and the extent to which a secret classified space program has been taken, much of the extent that gets talked about is pure hypothesis. It's my position, and I have studied the secret space program issue quite a bit and written on it, and it's my opinion that, yes, we do have a classified manned space program. It is my position that it was stood up, founded, established in the 1950s. As near as I can tell, between research, investigation, and personal experience, having been, in my profession and stuff I was exposed to, it is my position that the secret manned space program is not as far along as people paint it to be. It's probably, yes, it's farther along than what we're shown with NASA. It's farther along than just shuttles. But it greatly, it greatly was parallel to what NASA was doing for the longest time. And because it was classified, the most advanced stuff within that context, the known context, would have been, of course, applied by the classified space program. Now, I don't think for a minute that we have this secret space program with these Starship Enterprises or anything like in Star Wars. It's my opinion that, yes, I think we've probably put boots on Mars. I think I think we've probably landed people on Mars, even if it's just one or two, early exploration just to see if we could do it kind of missions. It's my opinion that whatever interplanetary craft that we have active is more like, it's closer to probably one of, our most advanced submarines than it is the Starship Enterprise. Think about
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Walter. I agree with you
with a relatively small crew, cramped quarters, and, think about it. The Navy's been doing submarines for 100 years. So if you're going to say, hey, what technology do we have? Let's say this is the 1950s, or let's say by the time they got to interplanetary, it was the 1970s. Okay, what technology do we have on hand that we could apply to the hostile environment of space? Well, the Navy's been doing it with subs for decades. So in my opinion, it's more practical that whatever ship, this hypothetical ship that went to Mars, probably would look, pretty much like a naval submarine. And, small crew. I think I put a number to it earlier this year when I finally sat down and I put a number to it. I looked at how many people it takes to, run NASA and such. And, it's my opinion that the actual theoretical personnel of a secret space program, a classified manned space program, would really be just in the tens of thousands. Now, these are the people that, I'm sorry, 9 or 10,000. 9 or 10,000, okay, people that are fully briefed, that leave the planet, that do off-planet operations, that are fully briefed in and part of the actual secret space program. But there's likely more peripheral people that are doing compartmentalized, functional activities, and aren't really briefed in on the fact that it's a secret space program that they're working on.
Exactly. There's the mundane and day-to-day work that goes on that is compartmentalized. Right. No question about that.
But I think there's only about 9 or 10,000 people that would be full-time employed by the classified space program, in my analytical opinion.
All right. Well, just let me throw this out there, though. I mean, as far as we're going down this road, I mean, NASA pulled off the biggest hoax of all times, employed 400,000 people for the moon hoax, and with, tin cans, with candlesticks going to the moon. I mean, I'm sorry, but there's just no reality based to that.
So you're saying we did not go to the moon? with.
No, I'm not saying that we never went to the moon in how they appeared it to make it go to the moon. I think that is what they showed the public, and on the side that we went to the moon in exotic spacecraft that, of course, we never knew back then and weren't privy to and still aren't privy to, except for the few people who've gotten that information out. I think we had this conversation once before, Walter, about this.
Yeah,
I'm not saying we didn't go to the moon. I'm just saying we never went in any conventional way. I'm sorry. That's my opinion.
Okay, but the history and technology are in stark contrast to that. It's more likely that, yes, indeed, we did fly those rockets. You know, the Apollo that you saw went, but that there was a level of classified technological enhancement that we were unaware of. Now, I question whether Apollo 11 was the first time we put people. That's my contention. I say we did it secretly to make sure we could do it, to make sure that it did work. I say that explains why Neil Armstrong was so oddly reclusive for being allegedly the first man to set foot on the moon. I don't care how humble and aw-shucks Forrest Gump you are. When you are the first human being that stepped off that ladder and stepped onto the moon, you're going to aw-shucks, every year or every once in a while on the anniversary of it and say, by golly, thank you, America. And that man became essentially a recluse. And it is my argument that because he knew darn well he had to play along and that he wasn't really the first. I argue that they did it with that technology, with classified enhancements, but that technology you saw, I argue that they did it secretly to make sure that it would work, because there's no way, particularly during the height of a Cold War, that they're going to put on such a big dog and pony show, not knowing for sure, not having done it before. That's my argument. But
all right. Here's my other side.
I don't think that was a big farce, though. What?
This is my other, Walter. This is my other side of the argument. In every development that we've ever achieved, we didn't just make one thing and just stop and said, okay, we achieved it and that's it. We didn't make one car and said, okay, we made it and, well, there's no reason to go on anymore. We made the car, made the plane, made the horse and the wagon. So in every development we've ever made, we've gone forward and brought it to the level where we are now. The space program, the so-called, the NASA space program, said, well, we're going to go to the moon. And we've gone this many times, but we're not going back. All the plans to build space. Well, let me finish. Just hear me out, Walter. They built the next level advanced spacecraft.
Right.
They abandoned the rockets, went to the shuttle, but the shuttle could never go past 275 miles of the atmosphere because the astronauts were already getting bombarded with radiation. There's the Van Allen belt, and we can have this argument all day long. But my point is, you don't just stop a progression of technology. In other words, if we were going to go to the moon, well, we would have developed bases and all that stuff. And what I'm saying is, Walter, I think we did it, but nobody knows about it. They did it through the secret space program. And they abandoned the whole project, but they did it as a stars and stripes thing at that time.
You've jumped to another topic entirely. We went from Apollo 11 being a big hoax dog and pony show to now, what did we really do on the moon and did we really stop going? That's a different topic entirely. I would agree with you there. Of course I don't think we stopped going to the moon. I think we do have, and continue to presence up there.
And that's where I agree with you. It's just we don't know about it. They'll never tell us. Unless the whole hoax is unraveled.
Where I disagree is that when the civilian masses actually begin to start gaining access to off-planet travel, then that cat will be slowly revealed out of the bag. I think they're already kind of doing it. It is my opinion that one of the first things a new president gets briefed in on is, hey, here's what we've really got in space. And I do not believe or entertain this ridiculously ignorant notion that presidents of the United States are not briefed in on what went on at Area 51 or what's really going on with UFOs. That is the most idiotic, childish thing, because, you know, just the fact alone that you got people, you know, in our realm talking about stuff that they know about, but the president's not briefed in on. Okay, think about that. How stupid that is. So
well, it is.
People,
I agree with you, Walter. I absolutely
now, on
agree
the
with
issue
you.
of the Van Allen belts, off the top of my head, I don't have it, but that actually has been answered completely, and it's answered in NASA documents and other scientific documents. The Van Allen belt argument has actually been pretty much neutered as far as it keeping, you know, people from going out into space. That's something that was not as big a problem as it has been pumped up to be, and it was solved a long time ago. It was handled a long time ago. So the Van Allen belt thing doesn't really apply anymore as, you know, an argument for man going into space in the way, you know, that we've been shown. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's my opinion too, that we continue to presence on the moon. I mean, hell, I think we put those boots on Mars, you know, even if it was just, you know, but going back to what I said about the slow reveal, you know, we're starting to have private people wanting to get out in space. If you recall, just 2 years ago, I believe it was, NASA finally gave the public, it wasn't reported widely, but the U.S. government and NASA kind of gave public parties the blessing to go forth into space. It was announced publicly, but a big deal was not made of it, and I found that to be very interesting. Now, when you have the, you know, president come out and say, by golly, we're gonna do this, and maybe we will have a space force soon. Honestly, I suspect that is a coy beginning of, as more common people gain access to space, they're going to see what's really and who's really out there, and pretty soon what is classified now is going to have to be revealed, and the part that will remain classified will be the specifics of certain operations. Okay, but eventually, yeah, I think we are going to be told about this, what is now a secret space program. Eventually, I think it'll be revealed.
I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime or your lifetime, Walter, but I certainly hope that that's the case. I mean, it just kind of reminds me of, you know, 9/11 and everything that happened. All of a sudden, they have this Patriot Act all written up, thousands of pages, flopped out, ready to go. Right? Flopped out, ready to go. This would have had to been written months and years before 9/11 happened. They knew it was going to take place. They probably perpetrated themselves in order to enact the Patriot Act. Now, again, I think that was all stopped with Trump's election. At least it was put on hold for a while. But I wanted to go to something really quick because we were talking about the secret space program. Are you familiar with the book Mission, or the mission to Planet Serpo that Len Kasten wrote? And I guess the information came directly from a source who was involved with it. He basically recused himself and recused his name and posted everything anonymously, but it sure seemed like everything that he had written, there was only 13 people involved within this form who were actually posting information. One of these individuals says, yes, this all happened. I was part of the program. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the Serpo situation, and unfortunately, that none of it can be legitimately substantiated. And I'm in that camp that presently there's nothing I see that substantiates Serpo. It looks like another attempt at manipulating certain elements of the public interested in such things. Unfortunately, that's the position I come from on Serpo.
But I'm with you. I got you. I leave my book open on that. I just find it very interesting and fascinating. I actually know Len. I know Len. He's a good guy. He's a very, very honest character. he's just going by the information that was given to him. So,
Exactly. And there you go. You hit the nail on the head. It's the people that he's getting this from that you gotta wonder about. You gotta question. It's like
you gotta question it.
It's like what's going on with these so-called whistleblowers. In that particular circus. With Wilcock, Good, Basiago, and Tompkins, rest his soul, and now this Emery Smith guy. I think
Emery Smith. I was just going to mention that. Yeah.
This stuff, in my opinion, because I get asked, I'll say it here. That's all a load of BS. Every one of them. Okay, and it's doing nothing but hurting. Any attempt at legitimate research and reporting of the potential for a classified manned space program. You see, I've gotten to the point where I call it the CMP, because using the SSP acronym now, brings with it the taint of, these bozos who are just, spreading nonsense, and they validate each other and call that validation. And it's unfortunately there's a bunch of people that are buying it because it appeals to their sense of fantasy and adventure. And
sounds like the Democratic Party. I'm sorry.
It sounds like
with everything that's going on.
It sounds like all political extremists. On all ends, actually, when you think about it.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially when you mentioned Corey Good and David Wilcox, because those guys' stories have changed more times than I've changed the tires of my car. So it's just, it becomes a total point of mistrust. When your story changes, well, you have no credibility with me whatsoever, period.
Well, and
the story.
The result, and I say in some of their cases it has to be true, that the intent of what they're doing was to discredit this kind of research, this kind of discussion. What it tells me is that, yes, we're onto something, that there is, of course, a classified manned space program, and they, of course, don't want us to know that. So what do? They put out this wild, wacky disinformation to try and steal as much of the spotlight as possible, and get everybody to paint any discussion of secret space program, classified manned program, with the same wacky brush. And they've done their job. They've made it look foolish and crazy, and most people will just not even pay attention to it, much less believe it. And that's their job in some of their cases, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you had a guy like J. Allen Hynek who was supposedly hired to debunk all these so-called sightings of UFOs, and he came to the realization that it was real. At least 10% of it was, and then he, flipped sides and came on the other side and said, look, the reality is 10% of this stuff cannot be explained, and truth be damned, but here it is. And it seems like through that time period from the 50s and 60s going up to now 2018 with this Tom DeLonge and this ridiculous, gunner surveillance photo. I mean, come on, are you kidding me? I've seen better photographic evidence from just about anybody on YouTube, and they're recording real stuff. And you're going to come up with that kind of nonsense to tell us, Tom DeLonge going to the stars, it's coming from the government, the CIA, and we're supposed to believe that nonsense? What a bunch of baloney, Walter.
Right.
I mean, come on, man. You want to talk about disinformation? There's your biggest disinformation campaign right there. For decades, for example, the CIA has been among the villains in the UFO community, okay? So the very first time that they change their game and they say, hey, I'm the CIA guy and I'm your friend, I'm just like you, a big chunk, not all, but a big chunk of the UFO community just eats
that up like sugar. They just fall for it, and suddenly we're supposed to trust the CIA guy. Now, I personally have nothing, I'm not out here to beat the CIA over the head because I've worked with them. I was in the national security profession field, and when you do what I did, anything that's international in scope, you got to work with, the CIA from basic levels of coordination on up to, operational people in the field. And, I encountered, some of the finest people I know who, were CIA people, and they were focused not on anything to do with UFOs and stuff like that. But, so it's just funny how the community changes a bunch of them with what they're being told. If they're being told what they want to hear, then, it's amazing what they'll eat up. Or if they think it'll, make them a bunch of money. I mean, look at the MUFON controversy.
Oh, big time.
But we have greatly meandered off of what
yes, we have. I'm so
about.
Sorry. Walter, every time we start talking and you bring a subject up, then I start thinking about something else, and I want to further that thought, and my apologies. I really, truly enjoy talking to you because we can converse on a certain level because we are both well-versed in most of this information, though our thoughts may differ in certain areas. We're both extremely well-versed, but obviously you're an accredited author where I am just a lowly talk show host.
Oh. I don't know how accredited I am. I have my critics, believe me.
But it's good to have critics, isn't it? Because it makes you think critically. That's what I always think. If somebody brings me information that may change my point of view or add to my point of view, I always accept it with an open thought. I never dismiss anybody's thoughts or ideas. I do not do that. That's a part of my critical thinking. And in my opinion, a lot of people lack critical thinking today. And I'm talking about in the general public. A lot of people just lack critical thinking. You can see it by the way our society has literally dwindled in IQ. It's just amazing to me. But I digress. We'll move forward, Walter. So getting back to the wheel. I mean, I'm just lost at my thought here, lost in train of thought, Walter. Let's move forward. Where do we leave off on the last point of the Empire of the Wheel?
Well, we were talking about the spiritualists and any nefarious connections they have to today. Now, of course, the scope of my book primarily was, 1915, what happened here in San Bernardino in the autumn of the second half of the year, I should say, because the first victim was found in August, according to the coroner. Was found in November, but probably died in August, according to the coroner, with whom I discussed this with. We were talking about, we were on the basic subject of the perpetrators being the spiritualists. Now, that's spiritualists with a capital S, the former, the movement that began in the 1800s with the Fox sisters and was very popular and actually was what led to what we call the New Age in our times. Now, I will say that, mentioning the name Harry Houdini in a New Age gathering is very often like yelling fire in a theater. You mention Harry Houdini and you get a bunch of boos and hisses, of course, because he and Walter Franklin Prince went after Marjorie, who was, kind of an icon in the world of spiritualists and psychics.
She was supposed to be she was supposed to be a very well-known channel, correct?
Yes, supposed to be, and in my opinion, based upon what I've read and such, was, I think, kind of a reprehensible human being. And Houdini and Prince and their close associates could see that and knew that, and they suffered for going after her because she was, a darling of the corrupt element of the spiritualist movement that was really controlling it. It came down to money, okay? What Houdini and Prince and their agents were doing was hurting the scams that these professional spiritualists were running on people. And it was worth a lot of money to them. And, so they really didn't like that, obviously. And they openly threatened him. One of the spiritualists at the congressional hearing in the summer of 1926, I believe, the year Houdini died, basically said for witnesses to hear that come the end of the year, November or something like that, she told Houdini, "You won't be here." And sure enough, he died in late October of that year. And there's a couple of researchers, authors, Kalish and Sloman, who have written an excellent book and done research on the theory of the murder of Harry Houdini. And I'm one of those who I think they've done a heck of a job, and I think they're right. I think, Houdini was murdered. I think he was poisoned. And, the punches that he took, not to go off on a Houdini tangent, but the punches he took in his stomach were done by a spiritualist-associated agent because they knew that the poison was wreaking havoc, on the inside. So it was clever what they did. It was careful. They were very careful to be able to have culpable deniability. Say, no, he died from a ruptured spleen or whatever it was.
Right,
when
ruptured spleen, exactly.
But when you look closely at the details, that's where you find the devil in that. And Kalish and Sloman have done a heck of a job. That's the place to start on the Houdini murder theory. But in my opinion, it all traces back to these corrupt spiritualists here in San Bernardino in 1915 and Walter Franklin Prince's experience with what I think they did. I think that right here in San Bernardino in 1915 is what sparked Prince's, investigation and crusade against them.
Well, Walter, let me ask you something. I mean, okay, you're going by the premise, or at least as what you investigated into, that Houdini was poisoned. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, why? Or my question would be to you is why would he do that death-defying, act of, submerging himself in water? If he already maybe had suspected that he was poisoned and would be feeling the effects of that. I mean, if that were you, Walter, and you were poisoned, and maybe it's a slow poisoning type drug that they used, but you're not feeling right. I mean, I know certainly if I wasn't feeling my very best and knew that I couldn't perform that act, there is no way I would do that. So how do you look at it from your perspective?
There's no way you would do it. There's probably no way I would do it. But neither one of us were Harry Houdini. And, he was very confident in his abilities. He was a man who, through most of his life, up till the end, was actually in extraordinary physical condition. And it was what he did. It was his act. Remember, he was a consummate showman as well. And he had announced that he was going to do this. He gave his word. And, of course, tragically, it didn't go right. But remember, he did not die doing that. He died from the effects of, the ruptured spleen. Okay? So there's really no connection with him doing the underwater routine, the escape routine. Other than it probably exhausted him and didn't help the situation. But his death was due to the ruptured spleen that was a result of the taking the punches in the stomach, which I say, and I agree with Kalish and Solomon, would have been exacerbated by the poison in his system. But it's kind of, it might mislead people to connect, the fact that he did the routine just a day or two or so before he died, because it wasn't the routine that killed him.
Walter, did they do an autopsy on him to actually know that it was a ruptured spleen that had basically killed him? Did they do an autopsy?
Because when they cut into him, the infection squirted out. That's how bad it was. It's all in the book. You can read Callus and Sloman's book. Yeah, it's like I said, they did a heck of a job. I believe it's called The Secret Life of Harry Houdini, and it gets into his work with the U.S. Secret Service, which is a fact. He did do work in investigations and operations that went up against counterfeiters, because, of course, the Secret Service is under the Treasury Department, and that was mostly what they did when they weren't protecting the president, is Treasury violations. And it's very possible that he had been asked, because Scotland Yard went to the U.S. Secret Service. You see, Marjorie's husband was a doctor, and there was an issue of boys that he was adopting and who were disappearing. And Scotland Yard was beginning to smell a rat here with that. And these boys were being adopted in England and brought over to the States. And they turned up missing. And Scotland Yard, it looks like Scotland Yard Scotland Yard did contact the U.S. authorities. And what the theory is that Houdini, because of his proximity to spiritualists, and because it was Marjorie's husband who was being looked at, this prominent spiritualist husband who was being looked at, it's very possible, and I say probable, that Houdini was actually looking at Marjorie and her husband over this issue of the missing boys. Again, that's in the Callus and Sloman book and in other books as well, but that's a little background there.
Right.
And these people were spiritualists. Okay, this is in the history of the spiritualism, whether they want to admit it or not.
Well, Walter, going back a little bit, I mean, the reason Houdini, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the reason Houdini even got involved with the spiritualists is to get in contact with, I believe, it was his mother who had passed to the other side?
He was kind of politely forced into that by the wife of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Okay.
And he and Doyle, who had been, Houdini and his wife had been great friends with Lady Doyle and Arthur Conan Doyle, until it was obvious that Lady Doyle was faking a seance. That it was allegedly Houdini's mother, and Houdini, he was really, really disappointed in the Doyles and unhappy with them after that, and it damaged their relationship permanently, and it just left Houdini with a very, bad taste in his mouth. So he never really went to them. In fact, it's not that he didn't. It's not that Houdini wasn't open to things like the paranormal and psychic abilities. On the contrary, he was good friends with Walter Franklin Prince, who was running the Psychical Research Organization. Okay, and
yeah, well, I
into
would have assumed
the
that
problem
because
Houdini
just in the
had,
practice he was in, yeah.
Yeah, the problem Houdini had with these particular spiritualists are the ones that were faking it, that were running scams just to rob people of their money. That's who Houdini went after.
So let me ask you this, Walter.
Mm-hmm.
In his quest to go after the charlatans at the behest of most likely the Treasury, or that time the Treasury Department, okay, did in his journeys, going to different channels and spiritualists and psychics, did he run across true and valid psychics and channels that he pronounced them to be very true and real and valid, at least to him?
He probably came across more than he talked about. Again, I'm not a deep student of all of Houdini's writings and commentary. You'd have to refer to that to see exactly what he said. But I am aware enough, to the extent that I've researched it, investigated it, and read what other researchers have come up with, from his own words that, yeah, it's not that he was closed to the idea of such a thing. Because remember, there's the whole issue of he told his wife, if I can communicate from the other side, I will try.
Right.
See?
Right.
So we have that example. I think it's a case of, you know what, not to go off on that tangent, but it's a case of we're talking about the secret space program stuff, just as a bunch of practical, down-to-earth, document evidence-based researchers into the secret space program were beginning to gain ground, okay, and advance the field with real down-to-earth, no pun intended, research. Suddenly, the goofballs came out in force, okay, the Corey Goods and all that, all right?
Couldn't agree with you more.
And there are those of us who consider ourselves serious investigators of the SSP thing, and we're opposed to those knuckleheads because they're making us look bad. They're ruining the field for serious research. Well, to bring it back to Houdini and psychics and real psychics versus fake ones, well, yeah, a guy like Prince, a guy like Houdini, real channels, really gifted people with psychic abilities, yet they would have a stake in stopping these corrupt spiritualists, okay, because the corrupt ones are, they're going to, either through scamming people, they're going to, put a bad name out there on the whole thing, okay, or just through their own goofy antics, or crimes, they're going to make the legitimate ones look bad or foolish, and it just comes down to being not right. And so that's where I think Houdini was coming from. It's not that he thought there was no such thing as psychic abilities. It's just that he repeatedly, time and again, proved that these particular spiritualists were running fake seances and hoaxing people just for money. They were committing fraud. And to make a distinction, he was researching the spiritualists, the corrupt spiritualists, on behalf of the American Psychical Research Society. Okay, Walter Franklin Prince, and I believe, I think it was Popular Science Magazine. It was one of the science magazines, okay? But the theory is that he was tasked by the Secret Service to investigate Marjorie's husband in conjunction with the Scotland Yard concerns. So he wasn't looking at the spiritualists for the Secret Service. He was looking at them for another organization, but that might have provided him, even though it was legitimate investigation, that might have provided him with the, what we call in my work, cover for action for looking at Marjorie's husband, because that involved, theoretically, the murder and God knows what else of young boys.
Wow. Let me ask you this, Walter. In your research into Harry Houdini, did he ever have, putting aside the spiritualists themselves, the corrupt spiritualists who he was going after, did he ever talk about, in his diaries or memoirs, about having any paranormal experiences himself and able to explain it if he did?
I think they were very shallow experiences. Again, you'd have to really talk to a Houdini expert, someone who's Harry Houdini was there. He was there, but he was on the periphery of my Empire of the Wheel investigation. And what I know of, subsequently what happened and stuff is not. I'm not as intimately familiar with Houdini's personal writings as a real student of Houdini would be. So, again, I would refer you to Kalish and Sloman's book, because I do believe it's discussed in there.
It sounds like the dictionary to go to for Houdini, obviously.
Well,
they know him fairly well.
Yeah, it would be a good place to start, I would say.
Right.
And remember, you're going to, if there's 5 guys out there, you're going to have 5 different opinions, and they're all going to tell you how right they are and how wrong the other 4 guys are. That's
and
just
most,
the way things
and most
are
of them
these days.
you're not going to be able to talk to, I'm sure, because they've all passed on to the other side. So maybe we could try and contact them from the other side, Walter.
Yeah, well, I think there's some living Houdini experts now, but yeah, the ones who are closer to him that would really know have left us. But I will tell you this: it's a very interesting little realm once you enter this subject and you see all the connections and such.
Right.
You know, I started investigating what I thought was serial murder that went unrecognized as such 100 years ago. And by the time I had finished the 3 books, I saw where the tendrils from various other things attached to this mystery, and the mystery's tendrils attached to other things, and it's bigger than even I have covered yet in my 3 books.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned tendrils as attachments. What about Houdini's children? Are there any family members? Children?
No children.
No children. So is there any part of the Houdini family that has gone aunt, uncle, so on and so forth, that had children and maybe knew their uncle or great uncle and had any stories to tell?
I think his brother might have had some offspring, but if there is anyone alive, I think it might just be one person. Again, I don't know if any of those people would still be alive, or perhaps somebody in Beth, his wife's family. I know there are some people in. My understanding is there are some folks in Beth's family still alive because they were the ones who blocked exhuming Houdini's remains. They blocked that a few years back, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And so there are some kinfolk, but Harry Houdini and Bess did not have any children. So
okay. Well, what about close friends? They may have left. Don't know, because this is all news to me. New to me.
It's interesting. They were friends with the writer Clifford M. Eddy, and I had the good fortune of talking with on a couple of occasions Eddy's wife's great nephew or grandnephew. Okay, and he was in possession of the letters written between Clifford Eddy and his wife and Houdini. I'm sorry. I apologize. There's a Houdini connection there, but Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, I know that name. That name.
Yeah. And in those letters, I believe there is something. There is a letter or two in that collection from Houdini, but it was mostly a Lovecraft connection, and but there is some information and some correspondence between Eddy and Houdini, because Clifford M. Eddy did have a connection with Houdini as well. So it was Lovecraft and Houdini, mostly Lovecraft. And I got to talk with this gentleman, and he gave me some very interesting insight and information that actually went into, I think, Empire of the Wheel 3, in which I demonstrated that I got in touch with him because Clifford Eddy's wife, who we're talking about here, had lived in Redlands and was living here just a few years before these alleged murders happened in 1915. And I go into my book, I go into the Houdini mystery in Empire of the Wheel 3, how it connects to H.P. Lovecraft, and as a reflection of something that is, connected to here, the San Bernardino Valley, and how it might have reflected on this mystery. As you can see, it's a tendril, it's a thread, but it's indeed there. And it's all very interesting stuff. And as you can see, in answering one question, you
Right.
lead into something that opens 10 more. It's that complex of a mystery.
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, Harry Houdini was a magician, more or less. He was a magician. He was an escape artist, right? And he performed incredible feats, especially for that time. People were awed and shocked, and for the most part, most people didn't know how he did it. I think Houdini had an incredible intellect, and I think he had a very high IQ in order to do what he did. But I find it interesting how these threads all connect into
how
all
he
these
connects,
murders.
To take it a step further too, subsequently to writing the first Empire of the Wheel book, even the first two, I have done more analysis, and it is my opinion, based on all that I found and analyzed, that Houdini had been very possibly personally acquainted with this mystery woman, Cora Stanton, who, was found floating dead in the lake here, who was the central figure in the Empire of the Wheel mystery.
Let me stop you just for 1 second, Walter.
Uh-huh.
You just made me think of something.
Mm-hmm.
Did Houdini, and I don't know if you know this or anybody knows this, because it could have been very secretive, very hidden. Did he have an extramarital affair that someone may have known about?
Yeah, well, he very likely did. Charmian London, Jack London's wife.
And the reason I'm asking that is because you talk about these murders, these things happening, and it seems to be all revolved around Harry Houdini.
The Empire of the Wheel murders not around Harry Houdini. Pardon?
The reason I'm saying this is that Harry Houdini, that's why the reason I asked. This is a thought, an outside thought process, is that he may have had an extramarital affair. You're saying with Jack London's wife. Okay, that may be true, but not very publicized. I'm just wondering if he had other extramarital affairs, and was maybe he the one who? Because if anybody would have been able to get away with a murder, it would have been him. Okay, see where I'm kind of leading to with this?
I get what you're leading to, but no, I would say no. That Harry Houdini is not the one, because remember, you've got these 6 other deaths, and there's when you look at the details, there was more than one drowning, there was more than one poisoning. There was a theme going on here, and besides, Harry Houdini's whereabouts were accounted for on the very days that this stuff was going on. So no, he couldn't possibly have been the killer of Cora Stanton.
Remember, he was a magician and an escape artist. That's why I brought it up.
but he was on a stage, on these nights, and but there's some very interesting parallels with for instance, the route that he took across the United States in 1915, and that Aleister Crowley was on. So he might have been watching Crowley. It's possible that the woman who, this Cora Stanton woman, which my co-author in the first book and I do not believe that was her real name, and we have a whole chapter dedicated to that in the book. But it's very possible that Cora Stanton, I'll use that name, was also somehow watching or somehow connected with Aleister Crowley, who may have been working for British intelligence at the time. So there's some skullduggery going on here, but the connection Houdini might, in my opinion, have had to Cora Stanton was that he knew her through Secret Service activity. In the second Empire of the Wheel book, I get into who I think is her true identity, and I argued that woman had been working undercover for the Secret Service and very likely had worked with Houdini prior to what happened to her in San Bernardino.
Tell you what, this sounds like a mini-series to me, Walter.
Funny you'd say that, but I'm not going to say anything more at this time.
Okay. All right. It sure sounds like it to me, and I'd be very intrigued and very much wanting to watch something like that.
Oh, I hope so. I'll pass that on to interested parties. But yeah, it's very much. What's crazy about it is, this is not a novel. I get asked this, like I was asked earlier. And I have had to correct people sometimes because when they hear the basics of this, sometimes they've said, "Oh, your novel," and I go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! This is not a novel. This is a nonfiction book here. This
actually occurred."
Yeah. The deaths occurred. The very strange circumstances and odd synchronicities and all sorts of weird things are real. Just certain elements are in certain places. And, this is stuff that you can go back to old newspapers and look at. And, and the references, are in the book and the books, I should say, footnotes and all that. And that's what is so astonishing about it is, the basic foundation of the mystery, this stuff really happened. And the books are my attempt to answer the question, what do I make of this? And I think there's much to be made of it.
Well, this poor woman, Cora, she was obviously the major player, major victim in this. Of course, there's the five other
victim,
side,
yes.
Right, but she's the actual victim. Was she autopsied, and was that was that what the coroner basically put down, that she died by drowning, or was there something else that was not put out to the general public?
No, it was released, but the medical examiner found that the drowning is what killed her, but he found that there was poison in her system, in her stomach, bichloride of mercury, which was a well-known substance that was used for various things. It was a chemical that was used in photography, for example. It was also used as a remedy for certain venereal diseases. The woman was a virgin. She was around 30, in her early 30s, around 35 years old, but a virgin. And that's why in the second book I present, I suggest that what she was is what you call a secular nun.
That wasn't that uncommon back then, though, Walter.
Oh, there were
back then.
No, there were actual organizations of secular nuns. They weren't. What's the word for it? They weren't directly, for the particular churches, but they lived. They lived according to the rules and the oaths. And I'm doing a brain dump on the word that, but they lived as nuns. And in her particular case, I argue that she was a secular nun for the Episcopal Church, and that there you go. Walter Franklin Prince was the Episcopal minister in San Bernardino. I lay out in the book how I think, he knew who she really was and why, and he knew because in those days, 1915, a suicide would never have been given a public funeral or certainly not a church funeral. And Walter Franklin Prince, her funeral was very public. Now get this, she's this mystery woman, but hundreds of people were at her funeral, and he very publicly officiated as the minister of the Episcopal Church and gave her a church burial. Now that's something you didn't do in 1915, okay? Not even in the Episcopalian Church, okay? Now that tells me, and I go into the details in the book why, but that tells me that the reason he did that was, A, he knew who she was, and he knew that she had not committed suicide. He knew she wasn't a suicide. And I think the giveaway that he knew she wasn't a suicide was the fact that he very publicly officiated at the funeral of an alleged suicide. So I think that's a big clue bird right there. But again, the book Empire of the Will 2: Friends from Sonora goes all into that.
Wow. I just, I had a flash in my mind thinking that, this Mr. Prince, I think, had something to do with her murder. Flashed in my mind.
I have an associate in all this, and my gosh, everybody was in on it. And it was kind of, you're reminding me of him there. Crowley did it, Houdini did it, Prince did it.
Who done it? Who done it?
No, it's and I do find it interesting, because a lot of people, when they hear that Crowley was, within 100 miles of this mystery, they tell me, they look at me, they smile all smugly, and they say, Crowley engineered it. It's Crowley. You don't understand. Like, I do understand. I've researched it.
That's the last person I would say did it.
And as it turns out, the first guy that everybody would think is, in my opinion, I stand by that, and I've looked at it thoroughly. No way. Not only no way, but he would have been very much opposed to it. So it's interesting. You got to ask yourself, who is it that's darker than Aleister Crowley among these spiritualists, right?
True.
Wow.
Yeah.
How dark do you have to
Maybe
be?
Cain?
Yeah. How dark do you have to be to do something Aleister Crowley would not do?
Well, you guys, we've done it again. We burned through 2 hours.
Oh, wow, okay.
There's no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Holy cow.
Yeah, wake up. I'm still here.
I didn't know it was 2 hours. I wasn't looking at the
why
clock.
don't you tell everybody where we can get your books and give out your websites for the people that came in late. And we want to thank you for coming in, and we will have you back.
Yeah,
good.
Walter, I just want to let you know, I love talking to you. This is the wonderful thing about speaking with some, and I truly mean this. I mean this from my heart. I really love when I can have a cognitive, functional thought process with somebody, and it doesn't mean that we have to agree. It's just that I can learn from someone who comes from a different point of view sometimes,
me too,
as you as well as me, and I absolutely love that. I love the idea of a challenge and thinking outside the box. I just wanted you to know that. I really did.
Well, I appreciate that.
Speaking with you.
I appreciate you guys giving me the time, in front of your audience to, talk about this stuff, and I look forward to doing it again. My books are available only in print on demand at lulu.com, LULU.com. Just put my name in there, and the books will turn up. My fiction is also sold there, and it's made clear which is which. The nonfiction's identified as such, and I think it's pretty obvious which ones they are. I also have the empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, and I jump in there. I'm not the kind of guy that is putting out something on the blog every day. So, I save a lot of what I do for the books. The books have to have something. I also I also have the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube, and same thing. I think I put stuff there about every week to 10 days, maybe every 2 weeks. And of course, you can find me if you want to ask questions or talk with me directly. Your listeners can find me at Facebook, on Twitter. I'm out there. And, I look forward to talking with you guys again.
Yeah, same here, Walter.
Having you back. We really do.
Truly enjoyed it, Walter.
Thank you.
Next time, maybe we can do a whole deal, maybe strictly on, just strictly the paranormal. And I'd like to get all your thoughts, and I'll throw all my knowledge into there. Maybe we can concoct something even bigger than ourselves.
Hey, excellent. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Walter. Walter, and we'll be in touch. And I will.
All right.
I'll put a copy of this recording on your Facebook page.
Thank you. Please do, and I'll get it out there.
Walter, have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
All right.
And folks, we have a short announcement tonight. Sadly, Robert and I are going to cut the shows back to every other week, probably for the summer, don't you think, Robert?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of got to do it. I know you do, and I definitely have to do as well. We're sorry about that, but it's just Bad Baby and I are going through a few things right now, so it just makes it a little easier on us. And I you know, guys, you know how it is sometimes. Not that we don't want to be here. It's just something we got to do for ourselves. But it'll be every other week, and you know what? It'll make the show that much better. We'll be we'll be more spunky, more full of energy, and you know, just loaded with much more questions. How about that?
So I recommend that if you do not follow me, go ahead and, you know, follow us, and that way you'll get the email alert of who's going to be on. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just check the window every 2 weeks and see who we're going to have on. But we are going to have Brother Peter on in 2 weeks, and we are going to talk about current events, so join us then. And so you know, next Friday we will not be out here. So if you come to the window, we're not here. We'll be here every other week. And we're going to do this for the summer, and when wintertime hits, we'll probably go back to the regular every week, right, Robert?
Absolutely, sweetie.
Okay,
makes my
so
life,
you all have a blessed
night.
night.
Yeah, everybody have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. And you know what? Don't fear anything, because there's nothing to fear. Peace and love to everybody, because this is what it's all about. You know, learning, comprehending more, and enlightening our higher consciousness to grow. That's what it's all about, boys and girls.
Yeah.
Don't fear anything. I love you guys, and I love you, my bad girl.